Warning, this episode may contain content that is not suitable for children. Viewer discretion is advised.
What's up, everybody? You're watching LED Live. Kendi, take it away.
The show where we use the light of Christ to expose the darkness found in media and our culture today. And before we begin, we just like to say thank you so much to our subscribers. And if you're watching right now and you haven't subscribed yet, go ahead and click that subscribe button and the notification bell so you can join the conversation when we put out new videos. Today we're excited. We have a special guest. Take it away, Michael.
Find out on this episode of LED Live.
Light exposing darkness.
Thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I basically wanted to talk about Transformed, about the transformation that God wants to do in each one of us. And as I was putting together this program about transgenderism, I started to realize just the impact of what that had for me as well. Being born, the first thought that I had as I became conscious about between the ages of 3 and 4 was that I'm a girl trapped in a boy's body. I didn't know what any other truth was other than the fact that I knew that I did not match what was in my physical body and that I wanted to be like my sisters. I didn't know how it happened. I didn't know where it all began, but just a few years ago as I started to put this program together, it started to answer some of the questions that I had in my own existence. And so I want to kind of talk about that today if we can.
Yeah.
All right. Sounds good.
No better than coming from personal experience. So, we're excited to have you on here because we kind of want to really understand this topic. We've explored it a little bit, but we're excited to shed some light on this.
Great, absolutely. So as I present, feel free to ask any questions that you might have, all right? Okay. So this is something that I found really surprising, that National Geographic actually dedicated an entire issue to the transgender movement about a year and a half ago. And underneath here, you can see just a few of the different identities or pronouns that you can go by and to call yourself. There's non-binary, agender, androgynous, cisgender, and the list just goes on. There's now over 100 different ways that you can identify. And you can imagine the confusion that's in the world. Now they actually have laws that are supporting that you have to use the correct pronoun for the type of person that you're working with, otherwise that's considered hate speech. So you can imagine the memorization that you would have to do to make sure that you got somebody's pronoun correct. I want to share with you a video clip talking about a television show called Our America, and they actually dedicated their program to the transgender issue as well. Take a look.
The way I work out is I like to go hard and fast and strong.
This is 32-year-old Tan.
And a lot of the guys can't keep up with that.
On the surface, Tan is strong and confident. But for years, Tan has struggled with a conflicted sense of self and a secret.
Come on, Tanya.
Tan was born Tanya, a woman. It's one of the most basic ways of identifying ourselves, male or female. You're either one or the other. But for millions of people, their physical gender doesn't line up with their inner sense of self. They are transgender.
Imagine your brain in the opposite gender's body. How would you feel? What would you do? I was just born in the wrong body.
This is a story of transformation, of different people across America in different stages of life. I'm about to meet these people and witness their journey of change, from the sex they were born to the one they feel they really are.
Wow.
So wasn't that interesting that you saw the person working out that they called Tan, and all of a sudden you realize that it's Tanya and not Tan? Wasn't that surprising?
It definitely was. I got a question. I want to know, he just said it was like a mental thing, like my mind is different than my body. Why do you think it is that this is treated differently than any other mental? Like, if somebody says, I'm fat, and you say, no, you're not. You try to change their mind or show them the truth. Or somebody that says like they're depressed, you try to help them. But when it comes to this, you can't. It's almost like illegal. In some cases it is, to tell them, no, you really are a boy, let's talk this out. Why do you think there's such a difference in the way it's handled?
I think part of it is sincere. I think it's a genuine issue. And your question is, why is it not treated as a mental illness? And that's because of legislation and also an agenda that's being pushed and promoted on us. Now, I would have bought into that whole idea even as a little child that was like 6 or 7 years old. They now have laws in the United States where if you're a little child and you come forward and you say, I'm a girl trapped in a boy's body, the law can actually intercede against the will of the parents and start giving that child hormone blockers so that that child can eventually have the sex change that they want.
Is there an age limit to that?
I'm not sure of any age limit, just whenever that child reveals to a teacher or to some professional that reports it. But if I was that little kid, if I was alive and a little kid during this day and age at 6 years old, I would have been standing first in line. Absolutely. There was no way that I thought that my body and my mind could become one on that. I prayed. I asked God to change me, that he would change me into a little girl and that I would be like my sisters. And I knew that I wasn't like the boys in the neighborhood, but I knew I wasn't like my sisters either. So I was trapped in this kind of gender purgatory, if you would, knowing that I was different, but yet I didn't even know who I was.
Is that what they would call agender or non-binary, not fitting either way?
Not necessarily. It's called gender dysphoria is the clinical term for it, and I think that that's even being written out because that's considered a mental illness or a mental disorder. Yeah. Let me go on. What I want to share with you now is this is the same person. This is Jamie, and Jamie's holding a box of the hormones that she's going to take, and this is the transformation that you're going to see from Jamie as a female to Jamie as this male-looking person. Take a look and just watch just what the hormones alone do without surgery.
The ending title said "Girls to Men."
Little play on boys to men.
Yeah.
Well, more than that, women. Why not women to men, or why not girls to boys? Why is it girls to men? I don't know. It's just something that popped out at me. Like, what is it with that?
Sure. It's interesting because now with the focus being so hyper-focused on gender and identity, that's something that I think that they definitely would be concerned about, and I bet that they were even intentional about that. Going from a girl to a man,
right.
Meaning this transition, instead of from girl to a woman, a girl to a man. Interesting. I never even thought of that. But when you look at the picture of Jamie there, isn't that shocking?
Like
and generally what I ask people is, I say, if you were just looking at this individual, if that person came into your church, would you let them date your daughter? I believe that the LGBT issue is nothing compared to what transgenderism is going to do to the church, because if you can't tell the difference between men and women, then you're not going to be able to know the difference between husbands, wives, mothers, fathers, sisters, or brothers.
Right. And now this question gets even larger because it's not like homosexuality where it's like this is a self-identifying man that wants to date a woman. Like, what do we do with that?
Well, let me make it even more confusing for you. In the state of Tennessee, a few years ago, it was unlawful to have your birth certificate changed to your transgender. So meaning that if I was born biologically a male, I couldn't have my birth certificate changed. However, there was a couple, a lesbian couple, that decided that both of them were trans, and so one of them was born in Florida. And in the state of Florida, it was legal to have the birth certificate changed. So she now became a he, and because in the state of Tennessee, gay marriage was not acceptable, but because she had a male birth certificate from Florida, she was able to marry her lesbian partner legally in the state of Tennessee.
Wow,
Yes.
loophole.
It just gets even more and more confusing, and we know that the devil is the author of confusion, and I think that you'll be even more confused as we go forward.
So this couple that married, though, they both identified as men.
Correct. Even though neither of them had had surgeries. They both had started on the hormones, but their bodies were physically female.
Wow.
So I want to move on to the next slide, defensive detachment and gender dysphoria. That was the term that we were talking about a little bit earlier. I talk about how when I came to Christ at 40 years old, I had these questions. I wanted to know why at my earliest thoughts that I was a girl and not a boy, or a girl trapped in a boy's body. And one of the things that God helped me to see was that there was a defensive detachment that occurred between my father and I. My dad was in the Navy, so he was gone a lot. But then when my dad was home, he was raging, a hot-headed Italian, and he was abusive. So at that time when little boys start to make this attachment to their same-sex parent, what happens is they have to leave the comfort of the mom and they go to the dad. So in a good home, in a healthy home, you know, dads take the kid and throws him in the air and wears baseball caps, and so the little boy starts to imitate that. You know, they realize that dads are exciting and dangerous, and so they want to imitate masculinity. What happens is you have this basically like wet cement. It has no identity, no shape. But what happens is as the boy transitions from the mother to the father, then masculinity starts to take shape with this wet cement. And all of that is healthy gender stamping. And that's why eventually boys grow up and they only want to play with boys because, you know, girls are gross. All of that is healthy gender stamping so that this masculinity hardens the cement. And so for me, during that time when I was needing a male role model, which should have been my father, he either wasn't there or he was abusive. So in my mind, in my defense, I detached from my father. I wanted nothing to do with that identity, and so I reverted back to my mother because she was the only other option left. I didn't make that decision. It was something that was before I was even conscious, but all of a sudden at the age of 4 or 5, I realized, whoa, something's going on here. I had 3 sisters and I wasn't like them, but I wasn't like the boys in my neighborhood either. So then when school started, the sex that was a mystery to me was actually my own. And so I got more rejection from the boys that called me sissy, queer, little girl, because they were picking up on my mannerisms because my wet cement was being formed in the feminine because I was patterning after my mother. And again, I didn't know how to fix it. I thought the problem was in my mind and that my body had to change and that it was my mind that was fixed and couldn't change. So you can see that this happened even at a time where I thought that, okay, wouldn't it be convincing to think that I was born this way? You know, if it was my first thought, then that must have happened even in vitro.
So you really came from the mindset of you were born in the wrong body.
Absolutely. No doubt in my mind. But again, it was from a 4-year-old's perspective. Right. You know, if that's all you've ever known, then it's easy to understand or to buy into the idea that, oh, I must have been born this way.
So you think that would have changed if your father was more present in your life?
Even if he was more present in my life, I think I probably still would have rejected him because he was aggressive and abusive. So I would have had that even more around. So I don't know if that would have made a difference or not. But I do remember being 10 years old when my father took us to the lake to announce that he was divorcing my mom. And I remember sitting in the car, my sisters were in the back seat, and my dad making this announcement that he and my mom were going to divorce. And I remember thinking to myself, good, you're out of here. To me, that was an affirmation that I had defensively detached from my father because my sisters were in the back seat screaming and crying, Dad, don't go. So that helps me realize that there was a defensive detachment that had taken place years before, and that helped me to actually understand more of what was going on. I struggled with transgender ideation until I was 20 years old. I remember every emasculation, and I was a little kid, and I grew 2 inches out of high school, and I'm only 5'5" now, so you can imagine it was really tough for me. My mother put me in school when I was 5 years old, so I was still way behind the kids on average for development and coordination. And I remember that I went to a school in Detroit, Michigan, Dearborn, Michigan, and they had such a wealthy school system that they actually had a built-in swimming pool inside the school. So every winter time in the schools, the boys would have the pool for a week and then the girls would have the pool for a week. So more emasculation would only drive the desire to be feminized, because what the message that I got was that I was inadequate as a boy, I didn't measure up as a guy, and so the only option for me is that I should be a female. The desire was to fit in. The desire was to be included and to be accepted. And so if I'm not included or accepted as I am, then that gave me the drive that, oh, I should change. I even thought to myself that if I was a female, then maybe men would love me. Maybe I would receive masculine love, which was really the baseline desire of what I had. So when the boys had the pool for the week, I don't understand this, and it's going to shock you, I'm sure, but the boys swam naked. 32 boys in 8th and 9th grade for that whole week swam naked. And
What kind of school is this?
I know, it gets worse. Public school. It was public
Public
school.
school.
Yeah,
Wow.
and so the boys would pair up for sit-ups, and you'd have to hold the guy's ankle while he's doing his sit-ups, and we did jumping jacks on the side of the pool.
Wow.
So
Seriously.
absolutely.
Naked?
Yeah. 2 years,
Wow.
yeah.
That's hard
8th
to
and 9th
believe.
grade.
Wait,
yeah.
what state is this in?
Michigan.
And this is
Michigan.
under
Dearborn, Michigan.
Yeah.
supervision and
Boys,
all of
man.
that. Wow.
I even asked my stepfather's brother, and he was several years older than me, and I asked him, did you swim naked? When the guys had the pool, and he said, yeah, it was just a common thing. Nobody
Wow.
batted an eye
This
about
is-
it.
Wow.
But what that did is, as I compared myself to the other guys, I still hadn't hit puberty, and some of the guys had beards, so it was just a constant reminder that I just didn't measure up as a guy. So my fantasies about becoming a woman were even probably the most at that time, because I would fantasize that if I was a girl, then everything would be okay, and I wouldn't have to compete, I wouldn't have to measure up, and I wouldn't have to worry about whether I fit in or not. But at 20 years old, when I couldn't get my religion and my sexuality to come together, and I went into the gay culture, for the first time at 20 years old, I realized that masculinity was more valuable than femininity. What I wanted was male affirmation. So even in that culture, if I butched it up a little bit more, and if I worked out in the gym, then I found that I got all the attention from men that I wanted. And I never struggled with the transgender issue again. It just went away. And so for me, even at 20 years old, even before that, in church culture, I got the message from God that I was unacceptable the way I was. And if I had attractions for the same sex, then the only way that my attractions would be acceptable to God is that my body should become feminized. So again, even in my mind, I remember thinking to myself, this would be the only answer. I hope that what that does is that helps you to see from the transgender's perspective that this isn't a show, this isn't something that they're just trying to promote or put out there. I mean, there's a genuine issue that's really driving a lot of this.
Right. If they had a choice, they would probably really wish that it was a normal, desire that they had, but they have this, unnatural desire that they're trying to grapple with and figure out. And I mean, that's why we wanted to open up this conversation, was just like, what do we do with this?
Right.
Right, that's a question I had. You were talking a lot about how you felt on the inside and your thoughts and things like that. I was wondering if there were any outward expressions of those thoughts and just things that we can pick up on small children who are craving this masculine, what was the word you used?
Affirmation.
Affirmation, right.
Right. So it's good. It's a really good question, because a lot of times the question that I'll get is, how do I help a child that I see is obviously effeminate, like an effeminate little boy? And most people, especially Christians, they have this narrow viewpoint that they think that, because my child is feminine, that means that they're gay. And that's a big misnomer, because just because somebody is effeminate doesn't mean that they're homosexual, because children aren't even sexualized until puberty, unless they've been exposed to abuse. But I remember that the thoughts inside my head is that my dad made an honest effort to try to make me more masculine. And so he was a cop, so he would take me out shooting guns. Well, that was even more aggressive behavior, which only drove me further away from wanting to be a man. And then he would take me to where they would attack trained guard dogs, German Shepherds for guard duty. I just wanted to pet the dog. And so again, it was just like every time my dad made these earnest efforts, it only reinforced the fact that I'll never cut it. I'll never be like them. I hate that kind of stuff. But what it did is it drove me back into, playing dolls and dress up with my sisters and my mom. So imagine the power, right? And we think that it has to be something earth-shattering, but what I didn't do is I didn't connect with my same-sex parent. And so what I needed to know that being masculine was acceptable, attainable, and desirable. And so even in my mind, and you said something earlier, Scotty, about that in my mind I wanted to cut it as a boy. I really didn't. I wanted to be a girl. And even if it was an option for me, I would have preferred to be a girl because of the thoughts inside my mind. So, and again, we're talking about a child that doesn't even have reasoning capabilities, right? And so even if that was my desire, imagine the power if my father would have just gotten on the ground with me and colored in my coloring book. What I needed to know is that I wasn't away from masculinity and that it could be something that I could relate to. And so if my dad would have just done that simple little thing, or even taken bath time, or, and to use that time to affirm me and to spend time with me, bedtime, having devotions, all of that spending time with the same-sex parent would have helped me to acclimate and to see, it's not that distant, it's not that far away, maybe this is something that would be desirable. So, you know, in talking to people, just because somebody is effeminate as a boy doesn't mean that they're gay. It just means that they either didn't have an example of masculinity or they didn't bond with that same-sex parent.
It sounds like you're not just saying masculinity, you're saying that the child needs to see in the masculine parent a form of gentleness and kindness that kind of helps make that bridge in transition, if
Absolutely.
you will. So that they can say, okay, well, I can also get this over here. It's not so much about either or, it's both. You know, they need to know that they can get, you know, that comfort from the male parent, as well as seeing things that are dangerous and fun and exciting as well.
Keith, that's a really great point, and I had never really put it together that well, but that is it. Because I went to my mom for comfort, safety, and security. From my dad, I just got aggression and hostility, which was undesirable. So I needed to know that my father was affectionate and loving and kind also.
Did your dad ever hug you?
Yeah, my dad was very demonstrative with his affection. We were Italian, so my father kissed me up until the time that he passed away when I was like 47. So that wasn't an issue that we struggled with, but I definitely got the opinion that masculinity was overbearing, aggressive, and unavailable. Now,
it seems like what was missing in the home was a well-rounded view of what a mother is and then what a father, or what a woman is and what a man is. And I think that's also missing as a conversation in family or also in church. Because, I mean, I didn't grow up with any of gender dysphoria or anything like that, but I do remember being a little girl and being frustrated being a girl because of what I thought was my future. As a woman, I thought, oh, you know, I have to be super soft and I have to be in the kitchen all the time. And yes, I wanted to have kids, but it was kind of put in front of me as like a burden because of what I was seeing. Not necessarily that women were, you know, openly telling me that kids are a burden or whatever, but just hearing certain conversations and the moms always complaining and saying they're so frustrated with their kids. And I'm like, man, is this really what I have to expect later on in life? But that's completely false. Women can be strong, women can be independent and also be submissive in a relationship with a husband and all these things. So regardless of whether a child is dealing with gender dysphoria or not, I just think having a complete view of what it means to be a man and what it means to be a woman, both gentle and aggressive, depending on when it's necessary, is very important for any young child.
Yeah.
Right.
You need two. You need both.
Absolutely, absolutely. Every little boy needs a mother and a father, just like every little girl needs a mother and a father as well. And it's interesting because in homes where they don't have fathers, and they have statistics now that say that there are more single mothers raising families than dual parents, and they say that that statistic can never go back. So now you have homes where little boys don't have a hero to look up to or an example of what masculinity is, and then you also don't have girls to have a father that will bounce her on his knee and tell her that she's a princess and that he'll protect her.
Right.
So you have boys and girls that are growing up without this father image, without this safety and security, and that's kind of like something that you can sense in the air. Even though I was thrilled that my dad was gone, as a single mother, my mom was raising us 4 kids, I knew that there was a certain level of insecurity in the home because dad wasn't there to protect us, even though I didn't want him there. So even if you don't even understand the difference, and even if a child was raised without a father in the home, there's, I think, generally that kind of feeling. There's a woman that was raised by a lesbian couple, and she loved her parents. She was raised in a good home, but she even said she was always envious of the little girls that would have their fathers when they would come to school for different programs. And even she became sexually active at an early age. She was never homosexual, but she was sexually active at an early age because she felt that she wanted the love from men more. And it wasn't until she was actually married and had children of her own that she looked at her children and she realized that she had been denied that opportunity to have a father figure in her life, and she realized the emptiness of what that caused for her. And I don't want to get too off of the topic. We want to get back onto the
I do want to, because that's a amazing point, because I can relate to that coming from a single parent household.
Okay.
And just what my mom did to try to fill that gap of the father being absent. And that's where the church family came in. And that's why it's so important for church family. Because I was in Pathfinders, and I got to view well, let me say
You
that
were
again.
around men.
Right, so I was able to go to Pathfinders. I was around men in the church and seeing how they interacted with other women and also children. And I mean, it didn't have to go to the extent of them bouncing me on their knee,
Right.
but just seeing that, having that in my view, and not just any man, but a spiritual man was very important. So she
Amen.
definitely made sure that I got that.
Beautiful,
as a child.
beautiful. Perfect example. So I want to show you the picture. This is me smack dab in the middle of 6 girls. 3 of them are my aunts and 3 of them are my sisters. And this is who I played with. It's almost like, you know, the rejection of my father's masculinity, being rejected by the boys in school, and then being surrounded by nothing but girls. I had no male cousins or uncles or anything that I played with. This is who I grew up with, and I was perfectly fine with that. But I also believe that this had a lot to do with some of that shaping that I was growing up with. I think this is interesting. I was just looking at one of the Oscar photographs or whatever, and came across this, and I heard this dialogue between the news people and this film clip as they showed this man in this dress, this gown, and him and his male partner were there as well. And it's interesting to see how the media is shifting now. It's a very heterosexual newscaster that was male and a female, and they were talking about the diversity and how wonderful it is to celebrate the transitioning of people being open to gender and identity. So we definitely know that through the media that there is an agenda that's going on. Mm-hmm. Talking about non-binary, this is the definition of non-binary, is somebody who is not determined by masculinity or femininity. So maybe on Tuesday it feels like dressing as a woman, and then on Thursday it feels like dressing as a man. And the idea is that he floats through the gender binary. So he's not defined by either one.
I mean, wouldn't that be interesting if you went to work and all of a sudden your boss was like, you know, it's a woman, or maybe one day it's a man, and it's like different? Like, that would just be an interesting...
Or what if this is your parent?
Yeah.
Wow. You sometimes you got a dad, sometimes you got a mom. Is his personality really changing with each persona, you know?
Mm-hmm. What if it was your spouse?
Oh.
Because we're going to talk about that a little bit later too. This is actually the gentleman that won the Eurovision Song of the Year. In the European Union, every year they have a competition between the countries. And this is the person that actually won that year. His name is Conchita Wurst. I lived in gay culture for 20 years. I saw men that looked just like this, only it was in a bar. You know, now to see that the public expression and acceptance of people like this, it was even shocking to someone like me. I also want to share with you, this is the gentleman that's in charge of the sex education for the European Union, and this is something that they were promoting. It hadn't actually been approved, but this is what was before them to introduce a sex education to all of the 10 countries of Europe. From 0 to 4 years old, they want to teach children not just how to masturbate, but how to enjoy it. From 4 to 6 years old, they want to teach them homosexual practice.
What?
6 to 9 years old, they want to teach them contraception, and they haven't even gone through puberty. But by the time they're 9 years old, they want to teach them gender orientation, where they split up the boys and the girls and they can cross-dress. And from 12 to 15-year-old, they want to teach them how to practice BDSM, which is sadomasochism. So the idea is, now that you've taught them how to have sex, now you can teach them how to abuse each other sexually.
You know what I find is interesting about this is nowhere in here is the typical mindset of a male and a female in a normal, you must be married and sex inside of the marriage context is the best way to go. I mean,
or
this
even
is,
the negative effects of these things.
yeah, this is like completely outside of what it means to be in a family.
Right. Because again, the issue is to destroy the family, to destroy the idea of that, and destroy in these children's minds what normal and healthy sexual behavior is.
And so wait, BDSM is like?
Sadomasochism, like masochistic, sadistic behavior.
Is that like dominant versus submissive? That kind of?
So is there any, when you're looking at this, is the legislation stating that this is taught exclusively at the exclusion of the other? Or is it both are taught together with an emphasis on one or the other? Do you know?
I don't know. I don't have privy to that kind of information, but I think it bears saying that, you know, when you teach a child or expose them to sexual things, I never even thought about sex until puberty, and I was never molested, but children that have been molested, it awakens in them this awareness of sexuality or sensuality even. So again, this is nothing less, in my opinion, than child abuse.
Yeah.
Because when you're exposing young children to these kind of behaviors and experimentation, you're actually educating them and indoctrinating them.
So when I was growing up, if a father were to sit down his 4-year-old kid with a pornography magazine, wouldn't you get arrested for something like that? And homosexual practice at 4 and 6 years old.
Yeah.
So is that saying that you can practice sex with a kid that young?
So I really want to kind of hold off on this discussion because we're
man.
going to get to that. We're going to talk about what is that like and what is the agenda and where did it start. So can we just move on for just a minute? Because I
Also,
want to
do
bring
you
it
think
back
that
around.
contraception practice?
So now this isn't
involves
just
abortion?
limited to what's going on in Europe. This is also going on in Australia. They talk about the rainbow politics, allowing male students to wear female uniforms. Boys can now wear skirts to school in Puerto Rico. In Las Vegas, schools are considering teaching their kindergartners about masturbation and homosexuality. So this is not just isolated to one area. This is going on around the world. Human beings are created male and female, but the current transgender ideology goes way beyond that. They're telling us that you can be both genders, you can be no gender, you can be a gender that you make up for yourself. And we are all supposed to just accept and affirm it. This is, from a Christian perspective, it's from the Family Research Council. But this is exactly the agenda that's being promoted. I want to talk about the fact that we know that the sooner that you can educate children, the sooner you can change the culture. And so this is a book that was on Amazon, and I was just looking on Amazon, and I found this book about Jacob and his new dress. And this is all geared towards preschoolers. Here's another book that I found talking about the princess boy. And it talks about the princess boy has a cool brother, and his brother dances with my princess boy. The princess boy loves his brother, and here's the princess boy and his brother, the transgender child. It goes on and it says the princess boy loves his dad, and his dad loves to take him by the hand and to watch him twirl. My princess boy smiles and hugs his dad. And then the last picture that I have here is my princess boy has playdates with boys and girls. He likes to climb trees in his princess boy tiara crown. He plays dress up. He likes to change clothes a lot. He wears a green ballet leotard and dances with his friends. All of this is targeted towards changing the attitudes of young people, because the sooner you can change their minds about the transgender issue, the more normalized you're making these behaviors.
That's one of the reasons why we wanted to start this conversation in the first place. Is I believe that families need to start having these conversations with their kids. Like, this is what's coming down the pipe. And, you know, if your kids are going to be exposed to other kids in the world, this is what other kids are learning. These are school systems that it may not be widely available in the U.S. at this point, but it will be. Yeah. It's coming.
So it's interesting, Scotty, because these conversations shouldn't even just be limited to the home. They need to be done in church. And this is what's going to happen. If you stop and think about it, even the influence that a parent has versus when they start going to school and then they're influenced by the teachers and the principals and their other classmates, your voice is going to become very, very small and considered very judgmental. This is a video talking about how the prejudice against LGBT issues in the Caribbean, and talking about how to change those attitudes. And the media is targeted to definitely change our attitudes about transgenderism. Take a look.
Most famous sports icons on the planet, such as Usain Bolt, who is sponsored by Virgin. If this man can electrify the planet in a space of 9 seconds and send his home country, Jamaica, into a frenzy when he wins a race, many are aware that his native island is not tolerant of the LGBTI agenda at all.
I don't care who won't vex. Jamaican now support no same sex. I don't.
So to break them down, if you just cleverly adorn their icon in a dress, it will slowly break down any resistance. Only those who understand advertising and media are fully aware of how it works. Just read Edward Benet's propaganda book published in 1928. And he advised corporations to use famous icons to promote an agenda, even if they are not fully aware of what they are doing.
So now this is something that Little Light Studios definitely has a grip on. And one of the things that I found amazing is Madonna actually did an interview with Rolling Stone magazine back in the 80s. And basically the interview went like this. They said, why do you put so many references to homosexuality in your music videos? And her response was, you know, at first many people would be disgusted. She said, but as they see it over and over again, eventually they'll get turned on by it, or they'll eventually just get used to it. And she understands the movement of the media, and I believe that this is the same agenda that's being promoted as well. Did you know that the whole idea about the LGBT acceptance happened 10 years ago? It started 10 years ago. And the whole idea was to use media to change the culture. And so now we see the culmination of what that's done around the world.
It's why when they made, what's that movie where the cowboy, Brokeback Mountain, okay? It's the number one reason why they chose to make a middle America cowboy, story and put him in a homosexual light, was to literally hit at the heart of America and change the mindset way back when, 10, 15 years ago.
There's a great book called After the Ball, and it basically talks about the whole gay movement and how it's been initiated many decades ago. It's interesting because back when I was young, there was a program called, I think it was called Making Love, and it was about a man that was a doctor and his wife and how they had this wonderful life, the beautiful people or whatever, and all of a sudden he ended up in a homosexual relationship. And when that movie was released, I remember being 18, 19 years old and shocked by it, but of course, definitely I made sure I watched it. But the media frenzy about the unacceptance and that the America wasn't ready for something like this, they had to actually put it back in the closet, they had to let it rest and let people get out of it. But what they would do is they would stick their feet in the water every now and then. They would test to see what the culture was accepting or not. And so what they did is basically like the frog in the pot, instead of just putting them in boiling water, they just turned up the heat slowly. And eventually now we have so much acceptance to that. But it definitely was an agenda. Yeah. So I want to tell you about this family. They're a family with a secret. Now these are actually the mother and father of these two little boys. They biologically gave birth to these children. But would it surprise you to know that Bianca, the mother, used to be a little boy named Jason? And that Nick, the father, actually was a little girl named Nicole. So really what happened is they were two transgender individuals, and they both went off of their hormones, and so the mother actually impregnated the father, and they gave birth to these two children.
Completely twisted.
This is what's coming into the world now.
I mean, if what your ideas of what a male or a female come from the imprinting of the father, like you talked about in the very beginning.
Yeah.
What does this do when you're a little boy and you're raised now with this really opposite-ended view?
I wouldn't even begin to know, and I'm sure that they haven't even been able to do studies about that. They haven't even done studies about the harmful effects of putting little children on hormone blockers. They don't even know the risk that's involved. They do know that the hormone blockers, whenever if you give a boy female hormones, imagine the firestorm that you're creating on the inside of this body, because that little boy is releasing male hormones, and now you injected these female hormones, and so they're fighting. Not only are there emotional issues that can come because of it, and that child is going to have to stay on these hormones for the rest of its life. There's just no going back. And so they found that it not only shortens their life expectancy, it also increases their rates of cancer, and they actually have to take anti-cancer causing drugs to actually keep the cancers from developing sooner in their bodies. So there's a whole lot of side effects just from the medications alone, but without the emotional issues. But the question that I really want to ask and that I present to most people is, if this family came to your church, would they be accepted there? Would they see the shocked looks on our faces? Would they be able to find out who Jesus was if they came into your church? And I think that it really challenges the way that we look at people and they look at other society, because a lot of times, we're surrounded in church by people who look like us. But I believe that Jesus died for them just as much as he died for somebody like me. And being an ex-homosexual that came into church culture with a boyfriend and a sexual addiction, I felt like this family as I went into that church culture, and I hid. I was afraid that if somebody knew who I really was, that the church, would take action and kick me out or talk about me. So I think that it's a real challenge to Christianity, because not only do we have to recognize the issue, and we need to be educated, and that's what this is all about, but not only to be educated about what's out there in the world, because you're not going to change this. This is happening. There's no going back. But how is it that we can teach people how to love, to be loving and to show the power of Jesus Christ to people that either we don't understand or maybe even find disgusting.
That's right.
Because these people deserve that same love, don't they?
At the core, they're looking for acceptance, whether it is from their same gender or opposite gender or a confusion of the two. Everybody wants to be accepted. Mm-hmm. And we have to figure out how not to alienate them in a way that pushes them away from God. Because I honestly believe that if they were around in this way in Christ's day, they would have been drawn to him. And we need to have that same, they need to be drawn into our churches because it is a loving environment.
We have examples of that. How about the woman caught in adultery? Mary was shocked that Jesus didn't condemn her, but he told her not to do this anymore. It's interesting because the LGBT gay affirming group that are within our church now in Christianity, they're basically promoting that is hate speech when Jesus told her to go and sin no more. Isn't that interesting that the words of Jesus would actually be considered hate speech? And that's the movement also that we're seeing within Christianity, is that there are certain words and certain phrases that we have to stop saying because according to these other groups that's considered hate speech. But the challenge really, I believe, is that we have to stand for the truth of God, but the truth of God has to be love. And I think that Christians have a huge responsibility in shaping some of that because Christians have been hateful in the name of Christ for many years. They did a study actually in Chicago, and they went around with a microphone and they basically just asked people on the street, and they said, what comes to your mind when I say Jesus Christ? And they put the microphone in front of them and they go, oh, Jesus was fair, he was loving, he was kind. All of the adverbs that you would expect to find for Jesus. But then they said, well, what comes to your mind when I say the name Christian? And then these people were not Christian at all, and they said haters, judgers, unfair, unkind. I mean, they gave all these attributes that were absolutely the opposite of who Jesus was. And I believe that we as Christians are responsible and have to take responsibility for that. But we have to also hold on to the truth. We don't throw out the truth to be more loving. The truth in itself is love. We have to offer the world something better than what they're getting in the world. And I believe that instead of focusing on behavior modification, because that's what the world offers, and they're saying that that's hate in itself, what we're offering is divine intervention, a divine relationship with Jesus Christ, and you can't get that in the world. So we're trying to separate, I believe, out the differences, is that, no, this isn't reparative therapy and conversion therapy, and our job isn't to make gay people straight. Our job is to show people who Jesus Christ is. We demonstrate that how we live, but then also as people study, they get introduced to a relationship with Jesus Christ as well. But I think that that's the real struggle within Christianity now, is because we have a label of being haters because that's how we've been for the last 100 years or more. So I want to play for you this clip, and I want to get some feedback as to how this hits you. So let me just play the clip for you.
The single most common question I get asked is, are you a boy or are you a girl? The simple answer is no. But then the response after that is usually a very confused, what? So here is the explanation. I am non-binary, and that means I identify as something other than male or female. Our society and history has led us to believe over thousands of years that there are only people who are male and people who are female. But that is because past society has based gender on physical sex.
Let me see what it is, nurse. Ah, yes, what a strapping young lad.
It's outdated. The truth is that gender is in the brain, and physical sex is a completely separate and different thing that is private to every individual. What people really mean when they're asking the boy or girl question is creepily, so, what genitals do you have? People need to realize it doesn't matter what living meat skeleton you've been born in, it's what you feel that defines you. Non-binary is a blanket term for anyone who identifies out with the binary gender. There are endless ways of being non-binary, and no two people identify in the same way. So just remember, gender is what you feel, not what your parts are. Don't be afraid to be yourself. Bye, guys.
So, wow. I mean, your feelings can totally change based on your parenting style. I mean, if you have abuse or anything else, that can really determine what you feel. So that changes who you are.
what you feel happens only after, you know, the coding of your DNA, which is set in process a long time before what you're going to think or feel. So I'm not sure how all that works.
Yeah. Well, I saw a lot of contradictions even in some of the things that she said. She said that you're according to what's in your head, not what your parts are. And then she refers to your biology as your meat skeleton, which it's interesting that higher intelligence basically means that I deny the DNA, which is fixed, and it's something that's concrete that you can actually use as an identifier. But the Bible is very plain. In Jeremiah 17:9, it says that the mind is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can know it? So I'm not saying that it's wicked to not connect with your biology, but how is it that enlightened thinking is that I'm according to my thoughts rather than what my body is? And so all that does is that just increases this disconnect from the physical, and that you can be whatever you want to be, and that you could be a Ford truck if that's what you think inside your mind. Right?
Yeah, I think, therefore I am.
Okay.
Isn't it ironic that people think Christians are nuts because they believe in fairy tales like creation and God and all this, but it doesn't matter what I am physically. What I believe in my mind, that's what I really am. Like you're living in a fairy tale.
Wow, I never thought of it that way. That's really interesting. But I want to point out also that the transgender issue, we're not talking about somebody that's hermaphrodite or somebody with ambiguous genitalia. We're talking about somebody who is completely male, feeling like they're not a male, or somebody that's completely biologically female. And I think that really the new attitude is that basically you can be anything that you want to be, and that we're much higher or better or different than what our biology is. And it's really sad to see that not only is the media promoting this, but especially with young people, they not only know all these terms, but they also accept this as truth for them. So one of the things that I also want to talk about is some of the issues that are already coming into the church. One of the issues that we had is a mother who was concerned that her son, who became her daughter, was lost. And basically, she had paid for her son to have a sex change. And I think that it warrants pointing out that just because somebody is transgender does not mean that they're gay. There are plenty of people that are transgendered that were heterosexual even before their sex change, just as much as there were people that were homosexual. So you don't want to make the assumption that somebody was gay and transgender. They're two separate things. What I'm sexually attracted to is different than how I view myself. Do you see the disconnect? So this is actually a man who had a 5-year-old son who called him daddy, and he had a sex change and became a female. So now the mother called us concerned that his salvation was in jeopardy, because now that he was attracted to females and now he's a female, he's still attracted to females. So she's thinking that now that her new daughter is a lesbian, that her salvation is in jeopardy. So when I thought about this, and I thought to myself, you know what, you didn't change your DNA. There was nothing wrong with his attractions. The issue was in how he saw himself. And so I said to the mother, I said, the issue isn't in his attractions. His DNA is still male. And he can mutilate the body, he can change the body to make it appear as female. But the bottom line is God gave him the DNA of a male, and so his attractions was never the issue that was a problem. So that I thought was really amazing. There was also a woman who worked in a prison. She had a relationship with one of the prison guards, and after the third time that they'd had a sexual relationship, this man confessed to her that he was actually a she. So now she's confused, she's sexually connected. We know that the two become one flesh, according to 1 Corinthians 6 verse 16, that don't you know when you have sex with a prostitute that the two become one flesh. So here she's connected to her emotionally and physically, and then she's thinking to herself, she goes, wait a minute, I thought it was a guy, but now it's a girl, and I have feelings for this person, am I gay? So imagine the confusion that was coming inside this woman's mind as well.
How did that work? How did a prison guard have sex with a woman and he was a she? I mean, does a sex change that good that it operates and everything?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, there's a whole lot of details about the situation we're not privy to, but let's just suffice it to say that it was after the third time that this woman had sex with this person that she did not know that it was not a male. Wow. So I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, it's just a crazy world that we are experiencing right now, where it's like sometimes you cannot tell. I mean, some of the pictures that we were looking at of transgender people, I mean, for all intents and purposes, they are the sex that they're portraying. I mean, you would have no idea.
I wonder, though, if the root problem in all of this is we are trying to define who we are. instead of letting God define who we are, which is really the more important situation.
Okay.
And I was listening to something the other day, I think it was about the story of Balaam and Balak and the children of Israel, and Balaam was asked to curse these people. And of course, they had been involved in some things in their past that weren't so good, but as he's, I think he was commenting on them, he said that the Lord seen them as righteous. And it's really interesting to think that God is seeing them as righteous when he looks at them or looks at us. God sees us in a different way than the way we view ourselves. And what is more important at the end of the day, how we view ourselves or how God views us? If we view ourselves in our own thinking, we're not going to be as valuable as the way that God sees us.
What's the path to connect the two?
What's the path to connect the two?
How we view ourselves with how God views us.
I'm not really sure. I mean, I guess we have to align our thinking with his thinking.
And I think it comes
ultimately what it is.
Through a relationship with Jesus that you understand what heaven gave up for us. I mean, literally, God was willing to cease to exist so that you have an opportunity. I mean, that's infinitely valuable. The King of the universe would trade places for you to be there. I think that concept, when you really grasp that, it changes how you view, your value.
Yeah, and not just how valuable I am, but who I am. God's the one that defines who we are, and if we don't find our definition in God, then our definition could be whatever.
So that's a really good segue, because what I want to eventually talk about is, when did sexuality become my identity? And it's interesting because less than 100 years ago, nobody had a problem with identity. There were two identities in the Word of God, and it was either your identity was in Christ. In Christ I'm a new creature, the old things have passed away, behold, everything becomes new. Or your identity was in self. And so that was the enemy and his desire for us to worship ourselves, right? In Romans chapter 1 is that man worshiped the creation rather than the creator. So in the Bible we only had those two identities. Where was it that all of a sudden my attractions become my identity? Well, we have to look to a man called Alfred Kinsey, who was paid by the United States to do all of this research about sexuality. And in his research, he was not only homosexual, he was a pedophile and also a masochist. And so Alfred Kinsey died of his own sexual practice. That's how he passed away. But this man was given the funding by the United States government to do all kind of research, and he skewed his research to basically support his own personal gain. As a matter of fact, Alfred Kinsey's idol was Aleister Crowley, who was considered the most wicked man in the world back in England. But anyway, the point being is that Alfred Kinsey was given the funding, and what he did is he basically skewed his research to basically support, and he came up with the statistic that 1 in 10 men were actually gay. But the research that he was doing was actually in prisons and in jails rather than the populace. As a matter of fact, he would actually pay men to molest their daughters and would give them a stopwatch to record some of the behaviors that they were doing. As a matter of fact, in one of his researches, he determined that a 6-month-old baby girl had a total of 22 orgasms within a 24-hour period of time. And he used oral and digital stimulus to stimulate this baby. And his definition of an orgasm was screaming, vomiting, and passing out. And this is what the United States and the world now is using as their research and understanding to shape the education that we're doing in sex education now. That's why it's coming into kindergarten, because Alfred Kinsey said that even children are sexual, but we also know that by development, a child that's been exposed to sexual things becomes sexual. But for me, myself, I was never molested, and so sexuality and sexual thoughts didn't even come into my mind until I was 13 years old.
It seems like you would have to deny Scripture in order to go down that path. And what I mean by that, in Genesis, it's clear. It says God made them male and female. And God wasn't talking about what they thought in their head. He was talking about the whole person, their physical makeup as well as their mental makeup. And so he only gave those two options. So to go outside of those parameters, it seems like you would have to deny Scripture and say, no, God is wrong. There are more than that.
Not only do we have to deny Scripture, we also have to deny science. I'm going to show you that the transgender hoax is really something that's being promoted not only by the media, but also by a political government, because even the transgender understanding goes against science, and even scientists that have talked about the damage of what the transgender surgeries do and the statistics, they support and show us that the Bible's definition of identity is still holding. Anyway, what I want to do is I want to take you to the cost of natural. And being a hairdresser for over 28 years, it's interesting because working with women, I know the cost of what it means to be natural. And I want to break this down a little bit. As a matter of fact, this is Bruce Jenner, who became Caitlyn Jenner through transgender surgery. But I remember being a kid. I remember being a young teenager when he won the Olympics, and this was considered the best athlete in the world for his time, male athlete. And I remember him being on the cover of my Wheaties box, and I'd be eating my cereal thinking to myself, wow, if I could just be as masculine as Bruce Jenner. And so, ironically, I can be more masculine than him now. But the point being is that he was struggling with transgender ideation. He struggled with it as a little boy, and I really identify with that. And as he was being interviewed, he was talking about the same thing that you saw before, is that the mind wasn't matching the body. I totally relate, and I think that we need to have extreme compassion for anybody that's in this dilemma. But what does it mean to be natural? And such a contradiction, because when I start to break down what it takes for him to even look this feminine, is he actually had to have surgery on his nose to make it more feminine. He also had lip enhancement. He had to have his Adam's apple shaved and his forehead to become shaved down to make it more feminine. He was going thin on top here, and he was balding, so he had to have expensive extensions put in, hair transplants, of course highlights and other hair extensions, because his hair probably naturally doesn't grow that long. Then when you start to look at his body, he had to have electrolysis on his entire body to get rid of all of his masculine body hair. And then of course he had breast implants put in, because even the hormones wouldn't grow natural breasts for him. And then a year or so ago, he actually had what we call the bottom surgery, where they take the male anatomy and they mutilate it to appear female. Now there's a whole lot of issues that can happen even with that. A lot of surgeries that aren't completed, and even when you're taking an external organ and you're creating an internal organ, there's a lot of yeast infections, there's a lot of atrophy that goes on, where the organ actually has to continually be stretched so that it can actually become a sexual instrument. There's a lot of issues that go on with that. So for Bruce to become Caitlyn, to finally be his natural self, there's very little that's natural about who he is today. And so it's interesting, we buy into this ideology that what you are in your mind, you have to create that physically, but physically there's nothing natural about it. And I'm going to use this to also show you the extreme, because I believe that we have to show, as Christians, we have to not only show that God's word is truth, and I believe that it also complements with science, but we have to show that it's actually better than what the world is handing out. Now, when I was caught up in all of the identity issues that I was struggling with, my desire was that, wow, if I could look like that, I would be convincing and I would be acceptable as I am. And so I understand the desire, I also understand the drive. But what was so amazing is at 20 years old, when I came out of the gay culture, I remember cross-dressing at Halloween thinking this is my big moment. And it wasn't like a game for me, it was serious work. I remember my sister did my makeup, I wore a wig, I wore the dress, the whole thing. But I remember that night as I was celebrating the fact that finally I can actually be out in public and be who I thought I was inside. The reality came to me is that, wait a minute, I still have to shave tomorrow morning. I have a chest full of hair, and this dress was only fitting because I was cinching in the areas to make me look more feminine. There was nothing feminine about me. And it was a harsh reality that this is not who I am. And so what I found in gay culture was that masculinity was more valuable than femininity. So if I butched it up and worked out in the gym, that what I was after is I wanted love and affection from men. And that got sexualized at puberty. It also got twisted around to think that, well, I'm inadequate as a male, and so I'll never get affection that way because I wasn't getting affection that way. And so I must become female so that I get that affection. Interestingly enough, they now have laws, and there's several states now that it's against the law to counsel a child that's younger than 18 that they can actually have heterosexual attractions, or that they can actually identify with their biology. But did you know that there are many people, and over 50% of young people, that if just left on their own, by the time they're in their mid-20s, they eventually find heterosexual attraction. They find a connection between their biology and psychologically, and so they don't have a problem. But it's interesting now that the law will refuse to allow you to guide a person into that identity, but you can only guide them into transgender and homosexual behavior and identity. So this is what's going on in the world today and being promoted and pushed by the media.
A point you said, it reminds me of the videos that we were watching and just hearing people's stories, how to make that kind of change, it's not a one-time thing. For the rest of your life, it's all about maintenance. It's a constant reminder of who you biologically are, and to continue with trying to make yourself or trying to go with how you feel is a lifetime of maintenance and misery.
And upkeep. I mean, the upkeep that they have to do just to basically continue to feel that they're going in that direction. And we were watching this one video of this one girl who had turned into a male, had taken the male hormones for 15 years, and she said that there was a fog over her mind that literally was like a depressing fog because she was constantly taking these hormones that were unnatural to her body. And then she was like, I'm sick and tired of this. I'm over it, and I'm not gonna take it anymore. And she said it was like a month, the fog just lifted. She had clear thoughts. All of a sudden her skin was clear, her hair was clear, and she looked like a male. It was interesting.
It's really sad because what you said is that all the maintenance to remind yourself of who you are, really, I want to change that statement a little bit. It's a constant reminder of who you aren't, right? That maintenance, because you have to constantly maintain the hormones and, the behaviors, and that physically there's scars that go with that. I think that people really underestimate the mutilating surgeries of what this does. Let me give you a case in point. There was a young boy that was 7 years old in England, single mother, right? And he announced to his mom that he was a girl, and she, not knowing what else to do, sent her son to a counselor that said, your son is transgender. They started the hormone blockers to retard the puberty process. He started to develop breasts. His voice didn't lower and didn't change. But all of a sudden, when he was 13 years old, he announced to his mother, he goes, I am not a girl, I'm a boy. But now he had natural breasts because of the hormones, and his voice didn't change. So now he had to have surgery to remove the natural breasts that the hormones produce, and also now he's got this voice that isn't naturally lowering, all because, again, we allowed a 7-year-old to determine who they were. I remember my favorite color would change on a dime. My favorite color might be red, and then the next day it'd be yellow. How can we even trust that a young child that isn't even mature has the ability to determine what sex they are?
It's interesting because there are other decisions in society that we say you are not old enough to make that decision until you are older. For example, there are smoking and alcohol and gambling. All these things, you have to be older to make that decision because society wants you to be quote unquote old enough and responsible and mature enough to engage in those activities. But with this, it's the exact opposite. It's almost like people are being ushered in as younger as possible to make a lifelong decision that they don't even understand necessarily the ramifications of at 7 years old. I have a 6-year-old, and I assure you, he does not see 10 years down the line, 5 years down the line. He might think that next year he's old enough to ride a ride on a roller coaster because he's a little bit taller, but that's about as far-sighted as we're getting,
But when we talked about the other day, the topic of abortion, and that you couldn't even go to a movie that was rated R, but yet you can have an abortion without the parents' consent. You can't even rationally make that decision that would impact a massive part of your life, yet you can't see the movie. That tells me the power of the media. They're shaping this.
If you're trying to change society, you have to start with the youngest to change their whole mentality.
When it comes to body modification, you can't even get a tattoo until you're 18 years old. You can't get a mark on your body, but you can do all this stuff to it.
You can change your sex.
But it makes me wonder if all of those things like dominoes will change as well, because once you change something as big as this, and you allow that large of a decision to be made for the permanency of a life, why not then be able to get a tattoo whenever you want? Why not be able to drink whenever you want, smoke whenever you want, gamble whenever you want, no matter how young you are, if that's what you want to do?
Right.
then it stands
So
to reason you should be able to do
Let's
it.
take it back into the sexual realm. So, okay, let's say if you're 7 years old and you can determine your sex, you can also determine who you want to have sex with. Drop the age for consensual sex, and now pedophilia is legal.
Isn't that what they're pushing for, though?
Uh-huh.
Now
So
it's
let me just show you
pedophilia as a sexual
a
identity.
1,000% increase in the transgender issue in England alone, all because of what the media is promoting. That I think should be shocking. But people don't talk about the fact that there is a lot of people that are dissatisfied when they have these mutilating surgeries. And what I find amazing is this woman who was named Nancy, who became Nathan, was actually allowed to have a lethal injection, a lethal assisted suicide, because she was not satisfied with the results of her surgery. It says, as reported in the Belgian news, Nathan said after surgery, "I was ready to celebrate my new birth, but when I looked in the mirror, I was disgusted with myself." And so the media isn't going to allow you to hear stories like this of the amount of people that are dissatisfied with the surgeries that they've had.
Is there a documentary that's made about this person?
I know that I found some stuff on YouTube.
Are there statistics that have chronicled this over the last,
Oh, I'm so
I don't
glad
know,
you
10 years or
asked.
whatever?
Yeah.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, there was a research done that was actually in support of the transgender studies, and they found that 41% of transgenders, whether they were before, during, or after the transition, found that 41% attempted suicide. 30% of transgenders will actually commit suicide. Those are the highest rates of suicide among any group of people. And when you look at the statistics, that alone lets you know that the transgender surgeries are not doing what they're intended to do.
You know, as a Christian, when we hear these kind of numbers, I mean, here is a group that needs to be reached. These people are literally dying on the battlefield because they are feeling unwanted and they've made a mistake that's gone too far. I mean, this is a group we, I think, as a Christian society, need to focus on. How do we reach them with the love of God? How?
Yeah, I've come across similar statistics in that particular demographic, transgender, in the realm of cocaine usage, smoking, as well as alcohol abuse. And what it made me wonder is there something going on in their lives that's driving them to these substances? Like, why them as a population versus heterosexual male or female?
Right.
Why are they seeing higher rates of abuse of those substances versus people who are not transgender? Is there some kind of psychological thing happening? Is it rejection of society? Is it depression? What is going on that makes them go to those substances?
Sure. Now, the media wants to promote that it's actually bullying that drives someone to become a drug addict or to be wanting to attempt suicide. But really, when you look at some of these countries that have LGBT marriage and rights for many years, 20, 30 years, when we look at Norway, when we look at Belgium, they've had those laws for many years, and yet the rates of suicide are still the same, they're unchanged, and the rates of alcohol and drug addiction is still the same. The term that we used when I worked in a psych unit is that the drug abuse is basically self-medicating. It's trying to resolve some of the conflicts that are going on. And I believe that what happens is with the transgender issue, it doesn't solve the problem, it just complicates the problem. As a matter of fact, this is a research that was done by Dr. Paul McHugh, and he works at Johns Hopkins. He's a psychiatrist. He says support of transgenderism and sex change surgery is collaborating with madness. And they did an exhaustive research, and they found that the transgender surgeries does not give the people ultimately what they want. And this is actually the link to the article if you're interested.
Yeah, I really think that when somebody is not seeing themselves as who they really are, in any other situation, you try to seek counsel. I'm ugly, I'm fat, you know, it's just, I agree with what he's saying, like to put, you know, if somebody says, I want to die, that's like saying, really? Well, I can help that, I can help you do that. I mean, that's the same logic.
So there's a term called body dysmorphia. And what that basically means is that I'm a healthy human being and I have this left arm. But you know something? In my mind, that I will not be whole until I can remove this left arm. And so body dysmorphia means that I feel detached from this arm and that it should be gone. Nothing wrong with the arm, it works perfectly fine. There are doctors that are willing to remove my arm so that I will mentally be whole, and they actually make a connection between the transgender issue as well as body dysmorphia.
But isn't that illegal to remove a healthy appendage?
Not if there's a doctor who's willing to do it.
Serious?
Wow. Yeah, cool.
So I have a question. Okay.
Huh?
So, I'm really wondering if it's more than transgenderism, if there's some underlying issue or some power control seeking. Why I say that is because I'll just give some examples. Let's take South Africa, which is 90% black people and 10% white. But when you remember apartheid, where the white population pretty much overtook the entire black population, and why is that? You would think that the majority would have the rule. But no, that 10% was able to break apart that 90 and cause division, and that's how they ruled. And you look at the United States, where it's really the top 1% that's controlling everything. And then you look at the transgenders in America is less than 1%, yet all these laws are being made, all these changes are being made, all these conversations are being had for this group of people, and instead of kind of helping, we're more enabling. And it just makes me wonder if there's more to it than just people wanting to be different than who they biologically are.
So I mean, this is a whole different topic. But I really think that there is some crazy technological advances that are coming down the pipeline. And those technological advances, they are aiming at trying to have a whole new human race. So they're messing with genetics, they're tinkering within the scientific world, and they have basically said by 2049, they're gonna have a whole nother race that's not human, it's more than human. And in order for you to accept that, you have to break down what it means to be human and tear that apart. So I think there's a lot that's going on here that the elite and other people are pushing these ideals, and I mean, they're in control of the media, right? So what's happening in Hollywood, what's happening in all this, I mean, it's being promoted heavily, but I think there's a lot behind that we'll uncover at some point. But
it feels
Scotty,
like we're a giant science
Let me complicate it just a little bit more, because now there's a contradiction going on with the LGB and the T part.
Yes.
Because basically what's happening now is if I'm non-binary and I don't identify as male or female, then you have no homosexuals and you have no lesbians or bisexual. You're just non-binary. So even that's a contradiction to the LGB, and so there's now even discussion among the group that where they want the T to be separated from the LGB part, because again, what that does is it destroys even their understanding that I'm not a male attracted to males, I'm just a non-binary attracted to another person or individual.
It's almost like if they had an agenda, it got hijacked by another one.
Exactly, right.
I don't know if you've ever connected this. Do you think any of this could have to do with like what's in food, water? I mean, you're talking about you're eating things that are pumped full of hormones. Could that have any effect on what's going on?
But if that was the case, you would probably see a lot higher incidence.
Well,
because
this stuff I don't think has happened.
You're basically all going to the same basic grocery stores, which are outsourcing their materials from the same
makeup's different
basic places. Yeah.
Yeah, but now you got
and
frogs
food
with
doesn't
three
have
legs
a
and,
food has a part in genetics. It can turn genes on and off.
So do you see a lot of trans vegans? That's right there.
I mean, that's kind of an interesting thing.
Yeah, I think
so. I think that if your mind is fogged with all kinds of things, does food actually really impact it? That would be an interesting study.
And a lot of times those are questions that we get in our presentations is, what does diet and your water and your surroundings, does that have an effect? And so, okay, let's give us the benefit of the doubt. Let's just say that has an influence, right? So does God still not have the power to redeem individuals? And what I find so beautiful, and I want to really segue a little bit now, after this next slide, I want to segue into, what is it that God thinks about the whole transgender issue? And what I find so amazing is that I find great compassion when you look at the verses about where it talks about how woman should not wear the clothing of another woman, nor man, for it is an abomination. When I really unpack that verse, God's not calling the transgender person an abomination, He's calling the behavior an abomination. Because every time my aunt would take me into the bathroom and tease my hair like a girl, what it did is it gave me this great fascination that I could now be identified as the opposite sex, something that wasn't gifted to me by God. But God doesn't condemn the person that doesn't relate to their physical body, because He understands that there are reasons why. But what I find so beautiful about God is He said the abomination is in that practice, because what it does is it pulls you further away from the blessing of the biology that I gave you. I find that incredibly compassionate on God's side. As a matter of fact, with the gay issue as well, He does not condemn the homosexual, because He understands that there are reasons why you have same-sex attraction. He said, but don't do the practice, because what that does again is it destroys the ability to relate as a man, because that's how God made me to be. I find great compassion in that. And again, I want to eventually show that for the person that's transgender, or for the person that has a relative or a loved one that might be LGBT or T, is that we want to make sure that this is a loving and compassionate approach to dealing with this issue, and to try to provide the answer that God already has given to each one of us. We're not here to judge them or to bash them. I certainly wouldn't, because of my own history. But I think, again, that God's got something better in store. And Isaiah 1:18 is beautiful. It says, come and let us reason together. And basically what we want to do is just unpack what science is talking about and using that to affirm what God's design is for us.
People are really looking for a transformation of their biology or
Nice
their body.
word. Yeah, I like that. I like that.
I'm telling you, God wants to transform our minds. You know, I mean, it should be an easy thing for people to understand.
Yeah.
You know, if you believe that you can transform your biology, God can transform our mind.
So the Bible also addresses that. It says that man looks at the outside, but God judges the heart. And what we're talking about is a heart transformation, the heart and the mind together. I like, Keith, how you were talking about how we're a combination of the physical and the mental. But Ellen White and biology, even science, psychologists recognize the fact that we're like three strands in a rope. And those three strands are physical, spiritual, and mental. And that basically the psychologist says that you can't do anything sexual without bringing in all of the other aspects. So meaning that I couldn't even give myself away sexually and think that it was just a physical interaction, that there was a spirit and also a mental aspect to that as well. And so if the devil knows that, and that he can destroy God's people by stepping outside of the confines of what God said healthy sexual behavior was, then what we're doing is we're destroying not only the ability to relate to God in a loving way, but we're also destroying the very image of God, because that was the blessing, that was the culmination of the man coming together with the woman in a committed relationship. That was the fullest expression of the image of God, remember in Genesis? So again, ultimately the desire for the enemy is to destroy the separateness of the male and the female and that combination together, because if you can't tell who the husband or the wife is, then you destroy the image of God again. Interesting. So I want to segue a little bit into some more of the science. This is a website that you can go to, the Science and Myths and Facts of the Trans Movement. This is a gentleman, he's actually on the board of the Pediatric Association, and what he does is through this video he breaks down not only the media movement but also the political movement to basically dash and abuse the science that has already been established through the transgender issue and how they're promoting an agenda. And he even acknowledges that. It's a powerful documentary to watch and to find out exactly what's moving the transgender movement and also the lies that are based behind it. So I want to share now, this is a gentleman that we actually interviewed on Pure Choices. His name is Walt Heyer. Walt Heyer started off as a little boy, and his grandmother wanted a girl. And so every weekend he would go to his grandmother's house, and she would make these beautiful dresses, and she would dress him up and affirm to him that he was her beautiful little granddaughter. Well, when he was about 7 years old, he brought one of the dresses home and exposed their little secret. But already he got the message in his mind from his grandmother that he only had value as a little girl. This became also affirmed when he was 13 years old and he started being molested by his uncle. Now, Walt never struggled with homosexual behavior or attraction. He was still heterosexual, but by the time he was in his 40s, he realized that he was transgender. He had a full and complete sex change. He had multiple surgeries to make himself appear female, even the bottom surgery. But as he was living this, he said, you know, at first, he said it was like he said it was like this honeymoon period, and he said he felt fulfilled, he was happy, he lost his wife, his family, lost his job, he was basically homeless, and he started to realize that, you know, I've had all these surgeries, but it still didn't make me female. I still wasn't having a monthly cycle, I wasn't able to conceive a child, and I realized that the DNA, again, that was coursing through my veins was male, and that everything that he'd done was a fraud. At his lowest point, alcoholic, suicidal, living in the streets, somebody introduced him to Jesus Christ, and that changed his life. Wow. And he realized, well, if I could have a sex change and become a woman, what if I could have a sex change back to become a man? And so this is who Walt Heyer is today, and he's got an amazing website called sexchangeregret.com. Inroad.com, and he talks about not only a lot of the statistics that I've shared, but also he talks about interviews with other people that have also been dissatisfied with their sex changes as well. What's amazing is that there is no female brain in the wrong male body. Current studies do not support the transsexual condition, nor do the current studies support the Harry Benjamin syndrome. And the Harry Benjamin syndrome was something that was developed by Alfred Kinsey and his associates as well. Any dialogue on that?
I mean, if you want to understand something about the sex laws, that Kinsey report it's a hard video to watch. But there is a lot of information in there that basically give you a context of the twistedness that has come to where we are today.
Well, Satan's plan, right?
Yeah, but it's just you can see how it's really gotten to this level here, and yeah, it makes sense why now we're having such a confusion in this area. I mean, this has been something that's been brewing under the surface for a long time.
It's calculated, and it was intentional, and it started about 70 years ago.
It seems like it would be, really beneficial for people to see both sides. If you haven't been through that, you don't know what's coming down the road.
That's right.
And so to look at somebody else's experience seems like it would be really helpful. It's like, there are people who have gone through, for example, an abortion, and as an expecting mother, you may be grappling with, should I have an abortion or not? It seems like it would be helpful to talk to somebody who's had one, and to talk to, people who haven't had one, and find out, is this the right decision for me to make, instead of just taking the nesty plunge, so to speak, and doing it without any thought of what are the ramifications of this long term. Is it always going to be that honeymoon phase, or are there going to be second thoughts?
Sure. So I want to move now into the biology of sexuality. And isn't it interesting to note that mothers produce a different biological recipe for sons than they do for daughters? And so I want to segue now into God's blessing and his design for sexuality. And what I find amazing is that not only does God design a different formula for the breast milk for males than females, but there's something even deeper. And I want to basically share with you what I think is the grandest part of the presentation is the story of Ray to Marissa. And so this is actually a female who was transgender. She was raised in a home where they didn't talk about God, and so her parents didn't care. You want to wear Spider-Man underwear, that's fine. She cut off her hair as a young girl. She would fantasize about her wedding day. But instead of being the bride, she wanted to be the groom. So by the time she was 16 years old, she was living as the male in a relationship with another woman, as a lesbian, and she decided that she had to have the sex change. She would hear the voice of Ray inside her mind that would say, you know what? You shouldn't have those breasts, and you shouldn't have soft skin. You need muscles, and you need facial hair. And so what she did is she moved to Seattle, Washington, where she knew that she could have the sex change. She was living in the community. And so she went to her therapist, and the therapist was a transgendered male to female, and basically looked at Ray at that moment and just said, if I could, I'd approve you for the surgery right away, but you have to live as a male for another 1.5 years. And so, but she did approve for her to have the hormones. You can see that some of the pictures here, there's facial hair, and that Ray was moving in that direction. But the voice of Ray just became louder inside her head and just said, you know what? You're so pathetic. Nobody will ever want you. You should just kill yourself. So again, living in this fog, not knowing what else to do, she couldn't even get out of bed to go to her therapy appointments. She called the only person that she thought would actually listen to her. It was a person that she hadn't spoken to in many years, and that person knew her as Marissa, but she called, and for the first time she had left her old name, Marissa, on the answer machine, and she said, listen, I'm in a bad way. I need some help. And a friend called her. Now, if anyone would have called her Marissa before that, she would have gotten angry. She would have clenched her fist, and she would have looked at him and she said, don't call me that anymore. My name's not Marissa, it's Ray. But her friend called her and said, listen, just come to me. Just come to me. And she wasn't going to judge her about her life or anything else and tell her that she was, crazy and depressed because of how she was living. She cared more about the fact that she just wanted her friend to live. And her friend said, I don't have any money to buy a ticket. She said, I'll pay for your ticket. So Ray flew out to her friend in Colorado, and her friend just loved her. And she said, you know what, I'll call you Ray. I'll call you whatever you want. I just want you to live. And so she didn't stand on principles or ceremonies with her friend, but she was praying for her while her friend was in bed and couldn't get out of bed. So what's interesting is that the power of God that's still alive today started to have an inroad on Ray. And so Ray thought to herself one day during that 3 months that she was with her friend, she thought to herself, she goes, God, how do you see me? First time she ever prayed. And what she saw in her mind was she saw this woman in a dress just praising the Lord with long flowing hair, and she immediately dismissed that and said, that's not me. But during that time, as she was healing, as she was starting to read the Word of God, all of a sudden she came to Psalms 139. And Psalms 139, if I could just sit on that for a second, is really the answer from God to the transgender issue. Because the first part of Psalms 139 talks about the pursuit of God. It talks about how, I can go up high or I can go down low. I can go into the darkness, but God is still there because the darkness is the same as light. It goes on to say that His thoughts towards us are as countless as the sands of the seashore. So the first part of Psalms 139 talks about the pursuit of God, the love of God, His desire to be with His creation. But then it segues and says, I knit your delicate inward parts together in your mother's womb. And for Ray, that was an obvious passage from God that I was intentional about the femininity that I gave to you. And so right then at that point, she started to embrace this, and the Lord spoke to her and said, you know what, you've been living as a man for all these years. Have you ever thought of trying on femininity? And it wasn't like a light switch on the wall that she could just flip and say, okay, I'm a female. There was a process to it. But what she could do is she could start letting her hair grow out. And as she started to let her hair grow out, she started to replace some of her clothing with more feminine clothing. What's so amazing is at the same time she's growing in the Lord, she's accepting what He says about her. And even in Jeremiah it says that before the earth was formed, I knew you, and I knew you to be a female. And what happened is she started blocking the voice of Ray inside her head. And the voice of Ray was really the enemy, because God would never tell you to take your own life. And as she started to embrace her femininity, this is who Ray is today as Marissa.
Amazing. Wow.
And I really like to point out the fact that this took nothing. This didn't cost millions of dollars for this transformation. And again, people judge the outside, but God judges the heart. And what you're seeing here is a transformation of what God did inside of the heart. This didn't take expensive surgeries, and that God was able to do this through the, as you said, Scotty, through the renewing of her mind.
You can see the joy on her face. You can, she is who she's supposed to be, and you can see the contentment in that face.
Yeah. What I think is even more gives more glory to God is the fact that because she didn't have those surgeries, because in time she didn't submit to the knife and have those mutilating surgeries, as she was walking in the Lord, eventually she got married to a man. Changed her, not only her attraction, but she married this guy. And what's so incredible is she actually had a baby a year and a half ago, and she's pregnant now with her second baby.
That's
What I
awesome.
find is so amazing is, again, like I said, that God's way is not just the truth. It's got to be better than what the world is handing out. Now, if she would have had those surgeries, she would have been living without the hormones. She would have had to be on male hormones for the rest of her life that increase her rates of cancer and also decrease her longevity. She never would have had the ability to actually hold a created being in her arms and to look into the face of that child or to nurse that child, because she would have had her breast removed. So again, what's so powerful, I think, about Marissa's story is it shows that God's way is not just truth, that it's better than what the world is handing out. And in my closing, the comment that really comes to my mind is that we get thrown into this bunch where we're talking about behavior modification. Like, people say, oh, Christians, you're trying to make gay people straight, or you're trying to make transgenders, behave differently. That's not our job. Our job is not to make gay people straight or to make transgender people happy with their biology. Our job is to let people be in touch with Jesus Christ, to begin a relationship with Him, and to let His transforming power make the difference. Because we're not talking about behavior modification, we're talking about a divine transformation. And I think that if the Christian church gives up on recognizing the power of Jesus Christ is still alive today, that we are watering down the gospel and we're not offering to people the divine restoration that God can provide.
It seems like people are willing to go to great lengths to try anything. I mean, very random things, surgeries, cutting things off. What if you were to just literally say, okay, God, I'm going to give you a chance. I'm going to give you a chance to let me live the life that you chose for me. Because like in Jeremiah, knitting you together in the womb, really, if you say I am born in the wrong body, that's really an attack on God. You chose the wrong person. Mm-hmm. You are the one that put me in this body, and you chose wrongly. And it's an attack on God. But what if you could actually just say, you know what, I've tried everything else to try to make me happy. God, I'm going to give you a chance. And I'm going to give you a window. Go for it. And I guarantee you, you will not be unhappy.
So what you said reminds me of Malachi, where it says, prove me now herewith.
Right.
If I will not open the windows and pour you out a blessing that you cannot receive it. And so thank you for that, Scotty, because for the person that is out there that is convinced that they're in the wrong body, or for that person out there that is confirmed that homosexuality is their identity, then hold God accountable. And that would be my statement to them, is that put him to the test. He made it very plain. He said, not only come and let us reason together, but put me to the test and see if I will not give you something infinitely better than what you're experiencing today. I love that challenge. I think that's perfect to share with those people that may not necessarily even agree with what we're saying.
That's right. Yeah. Awesome. What a great story to end on.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a
Isn't that amazing? Isn't that
it's
amazing?
a heavy topic to kind of like even wrap your mind around, and I appreciate your coming and giving us from your personal experience, because it is one world that I have not lived, I have not experienced. I do not have someone close to me that has struggled in that mindset, and so to hear your personal experience and to give us a little bit of knowledge from that. That's why we wanted to start this conversation in the first place. I know there's a lot of people out here that are truly searching, and like Mike said, give God the opportunity to show up and be the God that He's promised to give you a peace that passes all understanding, and hold Him to that promise, because that is truly what people are searching for, right? Peace and happiness. And if you let God have that opportunity, I guarantee you will not be sorry.
I think it's important, in this particular episode, we're singling out one particular phase of life, but really this applies to multiple phases, multiple issues that people are dealing with. For one person it's transgender, for another person it's alcohol and gambling or cigarettes, for another person it's pornography addiction, but whatever it is, God has an answer for it.
That's right.
And He can deliver any person from anything. That's the power of the gospel.
That's right.
Amen.
Michael, thank you for coming.
Are you kidding? Thank you.
Awesome.
This was awesome.
All right.
Thank you.
So I hope you guys enjoyed the show. Click like, subscribe, check out some of our other videos, and keep coming back. We love you and God bless you.
And if you guys have any comments, we want to hear about them. We want to interact with you guys. So if you have questions, comments, definitely let us know. If we can point you into the direction of some of the research that we've come up with this, we'd be more than happy. So God bless.